So as we join the race, we're looking here at a leading group of 6 riders who've managed to get themselves off the front end of the peloton. They've got 1 minute and 19 seconds over the race with around about 62 kilometers to go. That's 42 miles of racing. Bob, this is a serious move. This breakaway got away early on in the race. It's what we normally call the early morning breakaway.
A lot of teams represented in the breakaway. Leopard Trek up there. Saur has also got a man in the race. So a lot of the team favorites to win this race, they have a man in the breakaway that'll provide us with very interesting tactics as the finale plays out.
Yeah, I might have said there are 6 men. There are actually 7 men in the breakaway because the rider we missed out there was the rider from Sour-Soja-Sun. That's Rony Matthias. In this breakaway, David Boucher is in there from 103. Sebastian Delfosse from Belgium. William Clark, the Australian rider, managed to get himself into the breakaway. Andreas Clear, he is in there for Garmin Cervelo. Rubens Bertogliati, Team Type 1. That's a good move. This is a wild card team, and Martin Velits of Team HTC High Road.
HTC High Road has Martin Velits in there. Of course, perhaps the fastest man in the bike race is also a teammate of his, Mark Cavendish. He will be a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. He's in the Rainbow Stripes, his current world champion. He just won that title recently in Copenhagen.
Now this is the second group on the road, but it's a little bit complicated, Bob. We've got a large crosswind coming across the race, and that's how this group has managed to get themselves into a little bit of a move going forward. That's Matty Heyman in their black jersey there for Team Sky. There's not too many big names in this. I have to think that we are talking about Mark Cavendish today. Mark Cavendish, just over a week ago, won himself the World Championships. The first time a British rider has won that title. There you can just see him there, Bob, in the middle with the rainbow jersey on his shoulders. The first time as the number 31 is that since 1965, and that was Tom Simpson.
Mark Cavendish, current world champion, looking to add another monument to his list of results. It would be great to see Paris Tours on his palmarès. So Mark Cavendish looking to add another title. He's had an incredible season, finally winning the green jersey as most consistent sprinter in the Tour de France earlier in the summer. He is on the form of his life, having recently won the world title also.
Coming now into the town of Amboise. This is the second group on the road, Bob. They've got themselves halfway across the gap at 60 kilometers ago, and it really is rather a precarious situation as we've got that small group, about 8 riders off the front. Boucher, I think the most dangerous man in that leading group is Andreas Clear from Garmin Cervelo.
Currently, here's the second group on the road. Also Team Type 1 represented in this little split off the front of the peloton. That is Laszlo Brodrogi, the American Team Type 1, having a great Paris Tours. They were a wild card invitation to this event. It's a very prestigious race to be in, and they have a man in the first group and a man in the second group. So very heads-up riding by the 2 men from that team, Team Type 1.
There, as we go over the River Loire here, that is the Chateau of Amboise. The second group are now at just 30 seconds. So we're looking at the race now, Bob, separated by around about a minute. All of the main favourites are in the main peloton behind, including, of course, the brand new world champion, Mark Cavendish. The big question mark on everybody's mind is, which team is he going to ride for next year? Because HTC High Road, the most successful team on the international circuit over the last 3 years, will disappear at the end of 2011.
Team Type 1 in this breakaway, like you said, HTC, they will not be a sponsor next year. Perhaps the most successful team in all of cycling, with riders like Mark Cavendish and Tony Martin. That team lost their sponsorship, so all of those riders, they've had to find other teams to race for. Cavendish, he has not yet announced which team he will be racing for, which is rather strange. There's a lot of teams that want Mark Cavendish, but he still hasn't made the announcement of who he'll be racing for. A very complicated situation. He wants his lead-out men to come with him, so that's an extra 3 or 4 riders. Also, he has a very strong sponsorship with Specialized Bicycles, and he would like to stay on those bikes for next year, so very complicated to get the signature of Mark Cavendish on your team.
Well, he's talked about the fact that he wants to stay on a Specialized bike because he's been so successful. I was actually reading on the Twitterati just recently that a lot of people say Mark Cavendish has not had a very successful year, but I went back and looked at his palmarès, his pedigree. 2 stage victories in the Giro d'Italia, 5 stage wins in the Tour de France, and the green jersey, which no British rider has ever won before, and he caps it all off with the World Championships. I tell you one thing though, Bob, he would certainly like to win today because this is the sprinter's delight.
Well, Mark Cavendish has always on his career. He's always looked for the races that will define him as a bike racer. This is most certainly one of them. It's really surprising to me to find that he's never raced in Paris-Tours before, so these are unfamiliar roads, but once he sees the finish line, he knows exactly what to do. Hit the afterburners, and he's so successful. He wins races almost every month of the year, and he's looking for October. This is his debut in the World Champion stripes, and we'll see how it goes for Mark Cavendish in the sprint today.
Yeah, we were just talking just before the start of this race, Bob. We were talking about the fact that Eddy Merckx, probably the greatest bicycle racer of all time, won all of the classics except one, and it was Paris-Tours. He never managed to get the victory here. Mark Cavendish has won the World Championships for Great Britain for the first time since 1965. He would certainly like... I can't believe when I look back through his pedigree, Bob, that he's never actually ridden this race before.
It'll be surprising to see him in the sprint there and see how he does in that. Eddy Merckx, like you said, this is the only race to elude the greatest cyclist of all time in his career, Eddy Merckx.
This is a rider who is just surviving off the front end of that early morning breakaway, but now all of a sudden the second group on the road have reinforced the leaders. Bob, this is now, I think, starting to look rather dangerous. In there for Leopard Trek, a very experienced rider. He's the rider in the black and white jersey there, Stuart O'Grady, who next year will be riding for a brand new team, the Green Edge team from Australia.
Brand new team on the block, replacing perhaps the HTC High Road squad that goes away next year. Green Edge, an Australian team. First time we'll see a professional team from Australia at the top of the sport in the big races in Europe. Some of the notable names that have already announced that they will be racing for them: Matt Goss, winner of Milano-San Remo, and Robbie McEwen, the sprinter on the Radio Shack squad.
Yeah, and of course Matty Goss, second in the World Championships just over a week ago to Mark Cavendish. These two riders just surviving a fraction off the front end of this group, but now we're looking at, I think, a very large group with around about a 48-second advantage over the front end of the main field, and a group this big with inside of 60 kilometers to go is starting to look rather dangerous.
Yes, this is a very dangerous move. A big group, highly motivated, off the front of the peloton. Team Type 1 in there. Laszlo Brodrogi, the man for Team Type 1, just pulling off the front, and of course Stuart O'Grady, Leopard Trek rider, with the teammate on second wheel. But this is a big group, and that Geoffrey Lequatre from the Radio Shack squad also in this breakaway, and they're starting to stretch out their lead from the peloton. It's been a very tough finale, a lot of aggressive riding with a long ways to go, so the sprinters teams are really going to have their work cut out for them if it continues to proceed like this.
Yeah, if you remember, Bob, just 12 months ago, in fact, Geoffrey Lequatre, he almost got the victory for Radio Shack, going right down. And every year, I think the last 3 years, we've always said this race is not going to finish on the Avenue de Grammont anymore, because the French are going to build a brand new tramway right down the middle of the finish line. Well, here we are once again finishing in exactly the same place. It is a great place for this race to finish.
One of the iconic finishing straightaways in all of cycling, the Avenue de Grammont, coming into the town of Tours, and we've seen so many great battles in the sprints. We've also seen a few breakaways, and this has been a very aggressive finale. There's some crosswinds blowing across the peloton also, which makes the finale very tough to control for any team.
This is Bram Tankink here, sitting at the back here for Team Rabobank. I have to say, Bob, there's so much conversation, there's so much rumour and innuendo going on at the moment into this group. This is the Irish national champion, Matthew Bramire. I wonder where he's going to go next year, because this, I have to say, this is probably one of the most confusing transfer seasons I've ever discussed.
Oh, absolutely. We call it the silly season. That's Sylvain Chavanel. He is the French national champion, stage winner in the Tour de France, also the yellow jersey last year. He got a couple of days in that great tricot, that great jersey. For any French rider, it's a big honor.
101 now. Look at that man there, the Belgian national champion, the #1 rider in the world, Philippe Gilbert. He's won this race, Bob, on 2 separate occasions. He cannot really sprint. He has to use those little climbs down towards the end to try and get off the front end of the peloton. But what a season he's had.
He's had a great season, perhaps the most successful cyclist in all of bike racing this year. He will race for an American team next year, BMC. Big news coming after the Tour de France. A lot of intricate negotiations for Philippe Gilbert, but BMC comes up with his signature, and he will lead the team in the Hillier Classics in next year's season.
Watch this man, though, #1, Oscar Freire, the winner of this bike race last year, 3 times champion of the world, Bob, in the past. Gilbert's making a little bit of an acceleration there, but where is Oscar Freire going to go? I cannot believe that Team Rabobank, who he's ridden for the last number of seasons, he's not going to stay with him.
Well, he's such a great bike racer, very clever. We don't talk about him. He goes for many weeks and months sometimes without a win, and then suddenly he comes up with something huge like Milano-San Remo, and last year, pretty surprising when we saw Oscar Freire come out of the field and win Paris-Tours.
This is a very sketchy move. Stuart O'Grady comes to the front now for Leopard Trek, another rider who next year will be riding for that Green Edge cycling project. We still don't know who all of the big sponsors are going to be, but one of the big Australian businessmen, a guy by the name of Jerry Ryan, he decided he wanted to have an Australian professional cycling team at the Tour de France. He guaranteed a budget for the next 3 years out of his own pocket for $60 million. That's pretty impressive.
That's very impressive. Big fan of the sport of cycling, hoping to get a sponsor and offset some of those costs theoretically for Green Edge, but they were going to have a very good squad, a lot of fast sprinters and also some GC contenders. It's going to be very interesting to see how the silly season plays out when riders are changing sponsorships, changing teams, and also teams come into the sport and teams go out of the sport. Professional bike racing is very unique in that the riders can race for whoever they want, whoever they have the signature for, whoever that pays them the most money, generally speaking. And it'd be very interesting to see where Mark Cavendish winds up next year also.
It could very well go down to which team is sponsored by Specialized Bicycles, because that's what Mark Cavendish, he has a personal sponsorship with Specialized Bicycles. You can see that bike that he's got there. He loves the machine. When you're a sprinter, you want a machine that is extremely rigid, especially when you develop the kind of power that a guy like Mark Cavendish can put out and the run up towards the finish. I'm just going to take you into a little bit of specifics there, Bob, because a guy like Mark Cavendish in the sprint over the last 200 meters can develop around about 1200 watts. That's a lot of light bulbs.
He can power a small village on his own in the sprint in the Tour de France. We've seen that so many times. It's a thrill to watch Mark Cavendish race. He has that Specialized McLaren bicycle, a very special machine. Very few, a very limited edition of bicycles made in conjunction with the Formula One developers over there at McLaren.
Well, everyone's scuttling to stay in contact here. You can just see there's a little bit of a handsling that was coming from Lars back there to make sure that all of the other riders in front of him. You can do this theoretically to help a guy if you've left the gap yourself. Normally you're not supposed to do a handsling in a road race like this, but I don't think the referees will take too dim a view on this, because what he's trying to do, he can't stay in contact. But this race currently is all starting to come back together. It really is going to be a humdinger when we come down to the last few kilometers, as the whole of this bike race, once again, Bob, seems to be coming together. We're looking now at 48 kilometers to go, and we've got a very serious lead group forming here. This is Vitaly Buts of Ukraine from Team Lamprey in second position. Okay. Looking now at the leading group at 48 kilometers to go, we're looking at a very serious situation. That this group has got around about 25 seconds over a second group, and then the third group with the main field together are at 45 seconds. Just looking here at the rider from Lamprey, this is Vitaly Buts of Ukraine, and he is a very strong, solid rider. But the riders, I have to say, from Lamprey, Bob, in the back of their minds, they're thinking about Alessandro Patacchi. This is the second group on the road. They're looking at around about 20 seconds. Everybody can pretty much see each other, but there, just in the background, is the main field. This race, Bob, today has been decimated by the winds.
Yes, absolutely. Very aggressive race. We see some of the top sprinters like Alessandro Patacchi and Mark Cavendish, and there he is in the middle of your screen there just for a moment, rotating to the very front of the peloton, the chase group just about to catch this second group. But there is, like you said, a big group of very dangerous riders up the road with about a 30-second lead, with inside of 50 kilometers, about 30 miles left in the bike race.
Just looking at the peloton here now as it combines, at the second group being caught by the main field, Bob, there is a lot of chaos out here, and I can't see for the moment which team is actually taking control of the front end of the bike race. Just sitting on the back there, number 3, Graham Brown. Now, he'd be a tip for a scary win down towards the finish.
Most certainly. If it gets dicey, watch for Graham Brown to do something special in the sprint. A very fast sprinter. See him successful in the sprints, but perhaps he's here to lead out the defending champion of Paris Tour, Oscar Freire.
Yeah, I have to say though, Graham Brown, let's not forget a former Olympic gold medalist in the Madison with Stuart O'Grady way back in 2004 in Athens. The amazing thing about Stuart O'Grady is he rode the road race at the Olympic Games in Athens, took off by plane up to Germany, rode on the track for 4 or 5 days, then came back to Athens and won himself a gold medal. That really is an incredible performance.
We can see what the damage is capable of doing from the crosswinds. The wind blowing from the right-hand side of the road, so all of the riders lined out in the left-hand gutter, trying to find a little bit of shelter from the wind. Very tough. Mark Cavendish moving very close to the front of this group, right in the gutter there. Mark does not want to show himself until the last couple of 100 meters of the bike race.
No, you don't. But the amazing thing is, Bob, when you've won everything that Mark Cavendish has won this year, when you talk about his stages in the Giro, his stages in the Tour de France, the World Championships, how do you get the added motivation to come back and try and win this final race of the season?
That's a very good question. Mark Cavendish, he always surprises us. When it seems as if he's not racing that well, he comes up with the wins anyways. And I think for Mark Cavendish, when he decides he's going to add one of the monuments of cycling to his career, to his list of successes, he always finds the way to do something special. It was a little bit of a surprise to see the World Championships fall to Mark Cavendish. It's been a long time since a British rider won the Worlds, and a sprinter also. They don't have that many chances in the World Championships, but Mark Cavendish came up with the rainbow stripes just a few days ago in Copenhagen.
This is a very confusing race, I'd have to say, here this afternoon. It's breaking up, coming back together. The French are obviously concentrating here on number 81, because that is Sylvain Chavanel. What a disastrous year he had last year when he crashed in Liège-Bastogne-Liège. He was in a coma for 3 or 4 days. Then all of a sudden, he managed to come out of the coma, fought his way back to the top end of the sport, and then won 2 stages in the Tour de France and wore the yellow jersey on 2 occasions.
A big superstar of French cycling is Sylvain Chavanel, looking for a success here. If there's a breakaway, you got to give a little bit of the odds on Sylvain Chavanel to find the breakaway and have a chance to win.
Well, we talk about experienced professional bike riders. This man is probably one of the best in the black and white jersey there of Leopard Trek. Now again, what a story. There's so many stories towards the end of this season. Stuart O'Grady has been around. He rode in the Olympic Games in 1992 back in Barcelona, then in Atlanta. He now is going to be part of a brand new team, and I'm really not sure what we're supposed to call them. It's going to be Nissan, Radio Shack, Leopard Trek. But Johan Brunel has brought together 2 of the top teams in the world. Now that's going to be interesting for the Schleck brothers.
The Schleck brothers on Leopard Trek. Levi Leipheimer, one of the stars of the Radio Shack squad. This is the damage at the back of the peloton, but those 2 teams will come together, and that'll provide a very interesting situation. A lot of chaos. Also, another 2 big teams, Quick Step and Omega Pharma, are also coming together, and they will have a super squad as well.
Yeah, you just mentioned there Levi Leipheimer. That's a bit of a strange move by Levi Leipheimer, because he has been an integral part of Johan Brunel's team for a number of years. We're looking at Sylvain Chavanel. Levi Leipheimer, will be moving across next season to ride with a Quick Step squad, because he believes that he can get himself a position on the podium at the Tour de France in July.
Well, Quick Step has always been a team for the classics. Omega Pharma also a team for the classics, and Levi is hoping that they'll, because of the 2 squads joining together, that they'll be able to do the classics and be competitive in the stage races like the Tour of California, Tour of Colorado, and of course the Tour de France.
Yeah, the team, it's a conduit for Omega Pharma to come across from Omega Pharma Lotto, swapping now to go Omega Pharma Quick Step to create probably the most strong team that they can put together in Belgium.
Well, when you look at the success that Omega has had the last couple of years, especially with Philippe Gilbert, although he'll be on BMC, and the success that Quick Step have had, you have 2 incredible squads that will be united, and we'll see how they compete in all of the big races in next year's season.
I still have to say, I'm a little bit sad to see that HTC High Road, Bob, will be disappearing from the sport at the end of the year. But BMC Racing, which is an American team with a Swiss sponsor, is going to have the strongest squad in the event, because they're bringing Thor Hushovd, they're bringing Philippe Gilbert, Cadel Evans. What a squad that's going to be.
BMC will be astounding as a team next year. They've hired a lot of the big names, probably the Philippe Gilbert and Thor Hushovd, 2 of the most successful riders in professional cycling, will be on teammates with Cadel Evans on BMC next year.
And now it's the Dutchman on the attack. These 2 riders just moving out of the front end of this group. The rider who is the national champion is not too far off the front end of the main field. We're around about 46 kilometers to go to the finish. This is Jetse Bol of Holland, and we're looking at, I think, probably, Bob, 27 miles to go to the finish.
Getting outside of the outskirts of Tours before very much longer. Crosswinds have decimated the peloton. This is the lead group, this big breakaway here. A lot of riders, 20-25 riders in this breakaway, including the man in the middle of your screen. That is the veteran campaigner Stuart O'Grady on the Leopard Trek team, next to one of the riders from Radio Shack, and those 2 squads will merge for next year's season.
Yes, O'Grady, a seasoned campaigner there. It's amazing to think that Stuart O'Grady at 36 years of age has still got the incredible ability to bounce back from all of the mishaps he's had over the last couple of seasons. He really is. I think the reason he's moving across to Green Edge is he wants to take all of that knowledge he's had from a very long career and take it to a young Australian professional cycling team, which I'm pretty certain, Bob, will be participating in the Tour de France next year.
Green Edge, a new team on the block. We'll see how they do. Sometimes it takes a while for the teams to gel. That's why you need a rider like Stuart O'Grady to guide the younger riders and everybody work together. Bike racing is a team sport. Sometimes when individuals get the glory, it's hard to realize, but that's the situation. So Green Edge, we'll see what the camaraderie is. It should be very good on that squad. Every time I raced against the Australian riders, they always had the best morale, and that's going to be a whole team of really strong Australian riders.
Yeah, for many, many years, a lot of the top Australian riders, Bob, have dreamed about racing together under the flag of Australia. Guys like the man you raced with, Phil Anderson, guys like Robbie McEwen, in the autumn of his career, always wanted to be part of an Aussie structure. I think they're going to be a real team to be handling.
Yes, that'll be a team to be reckoned with, and see how they do. And also, there's still a few riders up for grabs, and see what their final roster is for next year. We're looking at the front of this chase group. That's Geert Stegmans, successful rider from Belgium on the Quick Step squad.
In the blue and white jersey of Quick Step. Over to the right hand side, you might just notice the red and white jersey. That, of course, was Radio Shack at Robbie McEwen, quite possibly riding his last event for Team Radio Shack, because once again, Bob, he will be riding next year with that Green Edge cycling team. Many people have said Robbie McEwen is finished, he's too old, but just recently he got himself a very good victory in the Franco-Belge race in Belgium.
He's pushing 40 years of age, Robbie McEwen. He'll be there in just a couple seasons, but McEwen winning Franco-Belge, the first stage and the overall title, and that is incredibly hard to do for a sprinter, but the gap is starting to go up now, a minute 19, so some of the gas in the peloton has gone off. 40 kilometers, just over 25 miles left in the bike race, and you don't see an organized chase so far from the peloton, so that move in the front becomes very, very dangerous indeed. The more time gap that they have this close to the finish line, the more dangerous they become.
Well, I'm a bit surprised to see these guys from Sky on the front end of the main field. You've got Greg Henderson there. Just over to the right-hand side, the rider in the black and blue jersey, Kurt Adler Arvidsson. He retires at the end of this season. He's going to go across to Team Sky and remain there as a team manager. Henderson is the rider in the middle. Alessandro Berlan is the rider in the red and black jersey there of Team BMC Racing. What a team that's going to be next year. We're talking guys like Hushoff, Gilbert, Cadel Evans. They're probably going to be one of the strongest teams in the world.
Well, it's been a strange off-season. A lot of teams consolidating and a lot of big stars finding themselves on the same team. Camaraderie will be incredibly critical for next year's season. Team BMC, they shepherded Cadel Evans to the win in the Tour de France, so I think there won't be any trouble with teamwork on Team BMC. They're going to be a very powerful squad next year.
Well, I have to say, a bit strange though, because you just all of a sudden you sign up the guy who was the previous world champion, and Cadel Evans goes out into the press and says, Hushoff's not going to ride the Tour de France next year because I don't want any sprinters in my team.
Well, he won 2 stages, had the yellow jersey for a week. I think he would be remiss not have Hushoff on the team, and you know, he can do solid teamwork as well, but when you're trying to win the Tour de France, it's a more ideal situation when everybody is working for the same goal.
Well, we were talking earlier on about Mark Cavendish trying to win Paris Tours at the moment. He's in a little bit of a sticky situation because he's got a breakaway of around about 22 riders with 1 minute and 26 seconds over the main field. This race is far from over.
HTC coming to the front now, putting a couple of riders up there at the front of the chase group. This is the peloton. Martin Velits is on the front there with Lars back. He's the rider from Denmark, talking amongst each others. They realize the danger now. The gap's gone up over 1.5 minutes with inside of 40 kilometers to the finish. That's about 25 miles. And here is the peloton chasing a pretty dangerous breakaway, but HTC now finally getting organized at the front of the peloton. Even though there's been a lot of crosswinds and it's a fairly small group, there is a chance now that they could catch the breakaway before the finish and give Mark Cavendish a chance to win the race.
Well, you might just have noticed just a moment ago, you could see the leading group on these long straightaways. You can see the leading group actually from the main peloton. It's very much like the Tour de France, isn't it? When we could almost pluck a stage of the Tour de France and drop it down towards the end of the year, and that is what Paris Tours is all about. It's a celebration of the sprinters. And as always in the Tour de France, we see HTC High Road coming to the front end of the main field, doing that tempo making all the way down towards the finish to try and set up the win for Mark Cavendish. Bob, I'm still a little bit flabbergasted to think that HTC High Road, an incredibly successful 500 victories, they'll disappear at the end of this season.
That's pretty discouraging for HTC and Bob Stapleton that has guided the squad. He is the team manager of that squad. He put the team together. He handpicked the riders. He has an incredible passion for the sport, and he did identify Mark Cavendish as perhaps one of the biggest stars of the future. He's been on this program for a long time. He's going to change teams. He hasn't announced where, but it'll be sad to see HTC vanish from the sport of cycling.
Well, they looked around for an awful long time to find a new sponsor, but you know, it's not a cheap sport anymore, is it, Bob? When you look at guys like Mark Cavendish, $2 to $3 million a year is his salary. When you want to put a team of 25 to 30 riders together, nowadays you're looking at an annual budget of between 20 and 30 million dollars. And Bob Stapleton, he was out there in the marketplace with a very successful team, but I suppose in these very difficult economic times, people are not prepared to put money into sport.
Well, cycling has been hard hit by some of the sponsorship issues. The sport will obviously carry on, but it's interesting to see this big sponsor, HTC, Lars back on the front, go away, and other teams consolidate. Two big teams are coming together to form one super team. Radio Shack will join with Leopard Trek, and Quickstep will join with Omega Pharma. It's going to be a very exciting season next year, and to see how those teams are able to work together and how the tactics play out in next year's season. But for the time being, we have the status quo of a lot of teams we're very familiar with from races like the Tour de France here in Paris Tours, the Sprinters Classic, the last big race of the year in France.
No, it certainly is. Only one real race left on the season. That, of course, is the race of the falling leaves, as they call it, the Tour of Lombardy. And that is certainly, Bob, not a sprinter's race. It's a race for the big climbers. This, though, is now, I would have to say, could I be disputed when I say this man is the fastest man on two wheels, Mark Cavendish?
Most certainly you cannot be disputed. He wins so consistently in every different type of race except the high mountains. Mark Cavendish is there, and it was when his team gets the lead out right, he is almost impossible to beat. A lot of riders have said they're going to beat him, but many of them have failed. He always comes up with the goods. He seems to have that little something extra at the end of very difficult bike races. We'll see how he does today. His team has come to the front now to control this dangerous breakaway, and the gap is hovering just over a minute and a half.
Well, I would be very concerned at the fact that we've got a little bit of organization on the front end of this group, the main field here. We've got HTC setting the tempo, but Bob, the gap is not coming down. It's locked in at 1 minute and 32 seconds. It's not going up anymore, but they're not starting to bring back that breakaway group.
Saxo Bank, rider on the front there, they have a fast sprinter in Baden Cook. Saxo Bank, of course, the team of Alberto Contador. It'll be really interesting to see what happens to Alberto Contador. He's announced he's planning to do the Tour de France next year and concentrate his season on that. However, he has a hearing about the clenbuterol finding from last year's Tour de France. That's supposed to happen in November. They've postponed it many, many times. Let's hope that we finally get some resolution on the Contador situation.
Well, it's a very strange situation, Bob, because after all, the World Anti-Doping Agency are now talking about accepting a small amount of clenbuterol in their testing process. So that will be a very interesting process to look into in the month of November. And yes, I do hope we get some kind of resolution. So as we look at the leaders here, a little bit of confusion, I'd have to say, in Paris Tours, because we've got a very large group at the front end of this race, around about 22 riders with 1.5 minute advantage. One man who's very keen to see this breakaway succeed is Stuart O'Grady. Every time it slows down, the man here in the black and white jersey, O'Grady, he rips up the pacemaking.
Had a great win in Paris-Roubaix, perhaps the most difficult classic, the most glorious of all classics. He won that a few years ago, so he is a superstar in the classics. He's found a very dangerous break. 1 minute 26 ahead of the peloton. It's taken a long time for the peloton to get organized, but finally HTC has come to the front to do the work to chase down the breakaway. It looks like FDJ is queued up behind them to do some of the pacemaking as well.
Yeah, now we've got a little bit of help for HTC High Road at the front end of the peloton, because the Saxo Bank, they've decided to come up. Maybe they think that Baden Cook's got the chance of a victory here this afternoon. Cookie, as they call him in Australia, seems to have come to a little bit of form down towards the end of the season.
Baden Cook racing for Green Edge next year. That's a big announcement coming from Australia. There'll be another big squad on the block in professional cycling. Baden Cook, green jersey winner like Mark Cavendish in the Tour de France previously in his career. Baden Cook, a very fast man, especially at the end of a long, tough day.
Yeah, we're talking about Saxo Bank. One of the riders on Saxo Bank, Jonathan Bellis, the British rider, he's coming back from a terrible accident. He was riding his motor scooter in Italy just last year, Bob, and he crashed in a very dramatic way. He was in a coma for a while, and everybody said the guy would never walk again. And yet here he is. That's the amazing story of comebacks that we see from professional athletes so many times. They are told you'll never walk again, you won't be able to have a career again, and here he is. Jonathan Bellis is riding in Paris Tours.
Paris Tours also. It looks like Martin Kohler from the BMC squad trying to get some libations for the finale of the bike race, get the tank topped off for the dash to the line. We're closing in about 20 miles to go in the bike race, and a good look at Philippe Gilbert in the black, yellow, and red jersey as Belgian champion. He's won nearly every single race he's entered this year, closing in on 20 wins on the season. He's having his most successful year to date in a very successful career. He has won Paris Tours twice before. He missed out last year. He was very active in the finale, and he's hoping that the crosswinds continue to take the impetus out of the field, out of the peloton, and that will give him a much better chance to leap forward and try to win from a breakaway in Paris Tours again.
Yeah, that guy we just looked at in the white jersey for a moment there was Frédéric Guédon, also a former winner of this bike race from a long breakaway. This race, Bob, we're looking now at the gap is starting to come down a fraction. It's down inside of 1 minute and 20 seconds with 32 kilometers to go at 19 miles of racing. If I was in the main field, I would start to feel a little bit concerned. A guy like Philippe Gilbert, though, he is waiting for the moment to pounce. He can't win from a big sprint at the end of a race like this. He needs to use those two little climbs down towards the end to escape the peloton.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if Omega Pharma, the team of Philippe Gilbert, puts some men on the front of this chase, or if they wait and try to set something up for Philippe Gilbert to break away. But they do need to get a little bit closer to the breakaway. The gap is still over 1 minute to the break, closing in on the final 20 miles of the bike race. Still a very, very dangerous move off the front of the peloton.
Nice little thing here. We're just looking at, well, we were looking at Gert Stegeman's there. I'm not sure if you noticed that the team manager, actually, they pull in the rear view mirrors on the car because the rider gets so close to the car on occasions when he's talking to the team manager. The rear view mirrors can be very dangerous.
Well, it is interesting to watch the team manager. Sometimes they have as much skill as the riders out on the open road navigating through the flotilla of cars. There's cars coming from behind you. There's riders going back to get waters. There's riders with flats or crashes. And you have your rear view mirror. It's absolutely critical when riders are all over the chasing cars to keep an eye on them. But then at the same time, like you said, the riders get so close to the car when they're handing up bottles, so you don't want to clip them with the mirror and knock them over.
So as we go back to the main field here, we're looking at inside of 19 miles to go to the finish. There's a lead breakaway, but they are slowly being pulled back by the main peloton. The gap down to 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Tough move here coming from Vacansoleil. Stuart O'Grady sensing the danger, trying to chase it down. This is from the breakaway. 30 kilometers, 18 miles left in the bike race. A lot of aggression in the breakaway. If some riders are sitting on when you're in the breakaway, you have to not go to the front, do all the work while they're sitting on and resting. You have to be able to get away from them, and the only way to do that is put in an attack. You don't want a rider sitting on all the way to the finish. The chances are they have a much better shot at winning the bike race.
I think we're now starting to get to the real critical point of this race because it's really a fairly flat race. As we left Vauve early on in the morning, around about 200 kilometers behind us, 125 miles ago, we're now circumnavigating Tours as Stuart O'Grady sees this as a possible moment. Look at the acceleration as he comes straight across the gap. He's looking for the motorbike. It's illegal to slipstream on a car or a motorbike, but it's the responsibility of the motorbike to get out of the way of the race, and many of these riders will try and use that as a chance to attack.
Well, Stuart O'Grady still controlling the front of the peloton. He's done probably the most work in this breakaway, and now he's able to close the gap down to the Vacansoleil rider. All the men still in that breakaway following the wheels, starting to see a little bit of lack of cooperation in the breakaway, less men working than are sitting on. That gives the peloton a chance to catch them. 1 minute and 10 seconds now the gap. There's Robbie McEwen, the rider from Radio Shack, right in the middle of your screen. Good chance to win today's race. A great sprinter, and he's on very good form at the moment.
Oh, well, just cast your mind back to a couple of Tour de France's ago. There was a little bit of a run-in on the finishing line here in the Avenue de Grammont between Stuart O'Grady and Robbie McEwen. They were both battling it out for green jersey points competitions, and all of a sudden their heads went together, and the referees didn't like that, did they?
No, they were both relegated in that circumstance. Headbutting, sometimes it's necessary to protect your position or your safety, but when that translates into aggression, we also saw Mark Cavendish and Julian Dean tangle in the same sort of situation in the Tour de France, not this past season, but the one before. They asked Mark Renshaw to go home from the race. Very sad day for Mark Renshaw, but it didn't slow Cavendish down that much. He went on to win 3 more stages in that year's Tour.
I think it made him rather aggressive, actually, towards the end of that year. He was not very happy with the referee's decision. Just having a look there. The Australian rider, William Clark, amazing, Bob. I mean, we talk... I turned professional way back in 1978. There was me, the only English rider, Jock Boyer, the only American rider, and now we're looking at Australians, 40 or 50 professionals from Australia riding on the international circuit. Next year there'll be 3 American professional teams on the international circuit. It really is a changing of the guard, isn't it?
Well, Garmin Cervelo, BMC, Radio Shack will all have top squads in professional cycling, and Australia will also have, for the first time, their own professional team. The title provisionally is Green Edge, and it'll be interesting to see how all the English speakers do, but they've started to become some of the dominant riders in professional cycling.
No, certainly. Well, you remember we always had to speak French or Italian when we raced on the international circuit, and now when you get into the main field, English has all of a sudden become the predominant language.
So if you didn't speak one of the European languages, it was almost impossible to know what was going on, apart from what you could lay your eyes on. So now English seems to be the dominant language, and almost everybody in the peloton speaks a little bit of English.
Yeah, now, as I said a little earlier, Bob, we're now starting to circumnavigate. If you took a road off to the right-hand side of the course here now, you would very quickly get yourself into Tours. But the race organisers have put in this climb. This is the first of 3 very difficult climbs on the run into the finish, the Côte de Crochou. We're looking at 1 minute and 20 seconds, and I would start to think that the main field are going to start to get a little bit frisky now as they get closer to the finish line in Tours.
Well, the gap's gone back up to over 1 minute 20. Côte de Crochou, there's 2 more. Beausoleil is the next climb. This looks like a pretty tough little climb. This will test the legs of the sprinters in the peloton. It's not very long. It doesn't cover that much elevation, especially when you compare it to the Tour de France and the big mountains. However, it does make it very tough on the sprinters to follow the wheels of their teammates as they try to chase this group. And look at that gap still going up. I'll tell you, last year, it was the rider Geoffrey Lecoitre from Radio Shack who left the field in a similar place, and he had less than 30 seconds for the rest of the bike race, and they only caught him with about 300 meters to go, just in sight of the finish line, and it was Oscar Freire that came out of the pack. But now it's a big group with 1 minute 24. It's going to be very tough to catch this breakaway.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back, looking back historically at Paris Tours, Bob, but it's nearly always been a main field together. Yes, we always get the early morning breakaway, which gets an advantage, but at this point of the race, it's usually the main pack that starts to attack these climbs. Here, we're in a very difficult and complicated situation for the peloton.
Very tough situation. It's a small group, a lot of riders not that motivated towards the end of the season, so you don't have this big peloton that's able to gobble up so much roadway. This is the breakaway. They are attacking each other now, but it's just going to be tough to catch all of the riders from this breakaway. There's going to be some very aggressive riding in the last 15 miles of the bike race, 26 kilometers to go, and it'll definitely reduce the numbers from this breakaway, but it's going to be very tough for the peloton now if they don't really put the hammer down, get organized. 2 or 3 teams need to come to the front of the peloton and do their own team time trials to try to catch this breakaway.
Ooh, a little bit of difficulty now. The Australian rider here, William Clark, he's slipping off the back, but let's not forget he was actually in a breakaway very early on in this bike race. These climbs, when they come at you one after the other on the running towards the finish in the last 14, 15 miles of a race, they're tough.
Very tough. BMC rider, looks like Marcus Burkhardt near the front. His teammate Taylor Phinney, also in this bike race, the young phenom from the United States, has started to come on form. He had a tough start to the season, but just in the last few races of the year, he's become very, very prominent in the front of the group. He won the prologue at the Enego Tour, and he led that race, a big prestigious stage race in north of Europe, for 3 days, and that was a great result for Taylor Phinney. He's trying to do something here in Paris Tours as well.
So 25 kilometers to go to the finish, and Bob, the gap all of a sudden is starting to stretch out. Has the elastic all of a sudden snapped in Paris Tours this afternoon?
I think it's going to go right down to the wire. Big group here, 25 men. Not everybody's cooperating, but still the gap continues to go up. There's a couple of short climbs, very tough testing climbs before the finish. This group has a great chance, at least a couple of riders, to stay away to the finish line.
No, you're absolutely right here. Stuart O'Grady's whipping up the pacemaking. The fact that the gap gap is over the 1 minute margin, Bob, is why all of the team cars are right in there behind. The peloton, I think, now are starting to panic a fraction, and I wonder if Mark Cavendish now is starting to realize it's not very difficult, it's not very easy to be the world champion.
Most certainly it is not. Everybody sees those rainbow stripes on your back day in and day out, and they always want to try to get the best of the world champion. He's going to have his teammates do a good job controlling these dangerous, aggressive moves, and also do a good lead out. They bring a very strong team to this bike race. Martin Velitz, Danny Pate, John Degenkolb, a fast sprinter in his own right. We'll see if they can control all of these accelerations. The gap continuing to go up to 138. This is a little group just off the front of the peloton, but what it says to me, it's not a very unified peloton. They're not doing the tempo that they need to do this close to the finish line, and small groups are able to get a little bit of an advantage. Very disorganized chase in the peloton so far.
Completely disorganized chase. Now let's bear in mind that in the last 10 kilometers there are two very difficult climbs, the Côte de Beausoleil and of course the Côte de l'Épon. We're just looking at the back end of the main field here, a little bit of disorganization as the peloton goes now past 25 kilometers to go, and that, Bob, is around about 14 miles of racing. 14 miles, 1 minute and 40 seconds almost. Can they pull them back?
I'm not sure that they're going to pull them back. There's Philippe Gilbert in the champion of Belgium's jersey right in the middle of your screen, rotating towards the front. A lot of riders in the peloton looking behind to see who's going to organize the chase. Crosswinds now making Indian file of the peloton. All the riders in the gutter trying to find a little bit of shelter from the wind. Meanwhile, here is the breakaway. Tête de la Course, that's the front of the bike race. They seem to be very aggressive and riding well together. Stuart O'Grady, second wheel. The old man of the breakaway, also the leader of the breakaway so far, being able to dictate the tempo and continue to increase the advantage.
It's very complicated, I think, Bob, the situation, because the majority of teams who've got sprinters in the back of the group have got riders in the breakaway. So they don't actually want to take the pacemaking because they feel that there's always a chance of one of their riders in this breakaway group getting themselves the victory. O'Grady, though, has got to be probably the most experienced rider in this group, turned professional way back in 1995 after the World Championships in Sicily of '94.
Skills Shimano in the breakaway. Good to find them in the front of the peloton here with a good break. A couple of riders of Vacances Soleil. Romain Fayou, a dangerous sprinter. You can see the peloton fanning across the road. A lot of frustration. Robbie McEwen very upset that the riders will not do the tempo required to chase this breakaway, and that gap is closing in on 2 minutes now.
Well, I tell you what, Robbie McEwen obviously feeling in great form towards the end of the season. He wants this group to get themselves organised, and he needs a number of teams to come to the front. This is Marcus Burkhardt in the yellow shoes of Team BMC Racing. He's thinking about Alessandro Balin, but probably more likely he's thinking about Greg Van Avermaet. And will Taylor Phinney be the man to lead Greg Van Avermaet onto the Avenue de Grammont?
Van Avermaet, a great classic specialist on the BMC squad, a Belgian rider. They all know how to do these classics so well. He's a fast sprinter. They do have to take a minute 38 out of a very motivated breakaway in the last 13 miles of this bike race. For any of the men in the peloton to have a chance to win, it's looking very doubtful for the peloton right now.
Well, it's totally disorganized here in the main field at Paris Tours this year. We're now looking at about 13 miles, 21.6 kilometers to go, and still that advantage is locked in excess of 1.5 minutes. Looking at the leading group now, they're starting to believe that all of a sudden they've reached the turning point in this year's Paris Tours, at the last big sprinters race of the season and right into the very heart of the Loire Valley. 20 kilometers to go, 12.5 miles of racing, 1 minute and 35 seconds. These men, Bob, can now start to believe the winner will come from this group.
These men are long gone. This bike race is all over except for the man in the breakaway. We'll see who's been sitting on, who's been doing the most work. That's going to be aggressive, but you can see in the peloton, and why I say that is because there's no organized chase. Riders attack, 3 or 4 men get off the front, and then the peloton catches back up to them, and then they fan out across the road. They sit up, and you can see they're doing that right now. Marcus Burkhardt looking over his shoulder. No one has got a unified front. Nobody is controlling the tempo, and you can see the peloton. There's Philippe Gilbert coming across. I think the breakaway is going to succeed today.
I'm not sure about that because, Bob, if we get a good cohesive group now with Philippe Gilbert in it. That's the man there in the black, yellow and red jersey, champion of Belgium. 21 victories to his credit so far this season. The best man on the international circuit. He is not going to give up this race without a shout. 2 times a winner. He won this race in 2009 and 2008 as a farewell, if you remember, to Française des Jeux before he moved across to Omega Pharma Lotto.
Well, who is going to work with Philippe Gilbert to close a minute and a half? If I'm in this group with Philippe Gilbert, I do not want to help him get even 1 meter closer to the breakaway. Let him do all the work. He's the heavy favorite. He's won Paris Tours twice before. Sit on his wheel and see what happens. He has about 8 or 9 riders with him trying to chase down the front group, but they are working together and they can start to smell the finish line now.
We're also starting to get into the terrain that's going to suit Philippe Gilbert, because in around about 6 miles time, Bob, we've got that succession of 2 very difficult climbs. The first one on the horizon is the Côte de Beausoleil, and then of course the Côte de Lepant, and that is where in the past Philippe Gilbert has used this terrain to his advantage.
A very aggressive finale. Those 2 little climbs could be the springboard that Philippe Gilbert needs to get across to the breakaway. 20 kilometers to go. I do not think it's going to happen, even from a man as prodigiously talented as Philippe Gilbert is, and as successful as he has been throughout this year's racing season.
Tête de la course. This is the front end of the bike race. Watch out for that man there now wearing number 122 for Garmin Cervelo. Andreas Clear, a former winner of Wevelgem, a man who on his day is a great one-day classics rider.
Crosswinds continuing to batter the main field. Philippe Gilbert going to the gutter, making the riders work to stay on his wheel. This is a tall order for anybody to close over a minute gap to 25 men in the front, but Philippe Gilbert is now thrown down the gauntlet. He realizes the danger. He has to catch this breakaway now with less than 20 kilometers to go, or about 12 miles left in the bike race. These men can work together. They can save their strength when they're not in the front. And now Philippe Gilbert is trying to do all the work by himself.
I tell you what, Bob, I think we're going to be in for a very suspenseful run down towards the finish line, because look at the gap. It's now all of a sudden down to 1 minute and 15 seconds. Now remember my old formula, 1 minute for 10 kilometers of racing. We're inside of that margin now. This could go down, and it has done so many times in the past, to the Avenue de Gramont, that final 3 kilometers straight up to the finish line.
But look, a very select group here. Marcus Burkhardt in the yellow shoes there for the BMC squad in that little chase group. This is the front of the bike race. Vacances Soleil, a good chance to win today's Paris Tours, and they have their teammates of Romain Fayou on the front of the breakaway, trying to keep them as far in front of the chase group as they can.
That's Andreas Clear there. Roy Curvis is the rider in there for Skill Shimano, wearing number 111. He's the leader of that squad. It's a squad that started off from a very small background, and all of a sudden they've become a very serious competitor on the international market.
More frustrations in the chase group, the peloton here, fanning out across the road. You don't see one team doing the work necessary when it's almost like a team time trial. 7 or 8 guys go to the front, and to chase a big breakaway like this, that's what's absolutely critical for the peloton. If they don't do that, if they don't get organized fairly soon, they won't have a chance to win this bike race. I'd have to say, chances are the breakaway is going to succeed today.
The only thing I would say against the breakaway, Bob, is there are a lot of passengers. Not everybody is working in this group, and that happens, doesn't it, when you get a large group of riders in a breakaway like this. Many guys think, I can get an easy ride to the finish. I've seen that Andreas Clear, he's sitting on the back of that group. He's not participating in the pacemaking. So about half of the riders in that leading group are not working.
Not working. They're sitting on, waiting for the last couple of climbs. There will be some more aggression for sure from the breakaway. Here is the peloton splitting up continually. 3 men off the front. That looks like Matt Heyman from the Sky Team on second wheel. That could be John de Genkolb, the fast sprinter from HTC, a little bit in front of the peloton.
Well, Matty Heyman coming off a very good victory in Paris-Bourges. In fact, that was his first victory since 2006, when he actually was the winner of the gold medal in the Commonwealth Games road race. Not a prolific winner, Matty Heyman, but this year he really seems to be an integral part of Team Sky.
Vitaly Boots sitting on the back of the breakaway. This is the front of that very dangerous group now. We're on the outskirts of the finishing town, and the breakaway riders starting to sense they have a chance to win Paris Tours take it away from the sprinters. Here's the chase group. This is not the peloton, though. The peloton is behind these 3 riders, but they are trying to close the gap. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. Just the 3 of them working against 25 guys that are still over a minute in front.
Well, that's Damien Gaudin, the rider on the back there for Team Europe Cup. But all of the pre-race favourites, Bob, they're at the back end of the race here this afternoon. We talked about Oscar Freire, the man who's 3 times champion of the world, Alessandro Petacchi, a former winner of this bike race, Robbie McEwen, Mark Cavendish, Daniele Benatti, Philippe Gilbert. They're all locked in the main field. They're looking at each other, waiting for somebody else to do the pacemaking.
Well, they need their teammates to come to the front and chase this breakaway down. You don't want to send riders to be caught in no man's land. I'm a little bit surprised to see HTC sending a man in between the gaps, trying to close this gap. Why not go back to the peloton and do the work and give Mark Cavendish a chance to bring everything back together and win the sprint?
I said a few moments ago, Bob, there was not very much collaboration in that leading group, and it's been reflected by the time gap. Look at that now, 16 kilometers, 10 miles of racing to go. Now all of a sudden the main group here that we're looking at has lost a lot of their impetus. 47 seconds. They are going to get caught, my man.
Time will tell. I think they're waiting for the last couple of climbs, and then they will launch their attacks. But a lot of riders, like you said, sitting on that breakaway. Sylvain Chavanel going off the front of the peloton, trying to close the gap. There's 3 men between Chavanel and the breakaway, so Sylvain Chavanel, very aggressive now. Riders, there's the cars. You can see in the background, all the team cars have been pulled out of the gap because it's now come inside of 1 minute.
15.5 kilometers to go. Still, it's Stuart O'Grady. Every time this breakaway slows down, he wants to keep the pace as high as possible because he knows as long as you're off the front in a race like Paris Tours, you've got a chance of the victory. The attacker off the front end of the peloton, though, is in the Bleu Blanc Rouge, the red, white and blue champion of France, Sylvain Chavanel.
Big star of French cycling, maybe one of the top 2, along with Thomas Voeckler from the Europa Car squad. Thomas Voeckler having a great Tour de France, number of days in the yellow jersey and finishing 4th overall, the best a Frenchman has done in a long time. Now that gap's starting to go back out. The attacks come from the peloton, the gap comes down, but the riders in the breakaway still riding steady, keeping a steady tempo, and every time someone hesitates in the field, their advantage goes back up. If they get in 10 kilometers to go with the same advantage over 1 minute, lights out. Sorry, Paul,
you
but that's
are
what's
looking now.
happen.
You could be right, Paul. We've stretched it back up. It came inside of the minute. It's gone back up to the 1:04. These guys now are trying to see whether or not they can steal a slight advantage. And I would say this is not a very good tactic for the breakaway group. When you've got one guy going off the front, it takes away a little bit of the impetus, a little bit of the organization, as we now start to see another rider moving off the front end of the main field.
FDJ rider Arnaud Girard going off the front, getting a little bit of a slingshot from the motorbike right there. Technical corner, see how the rest of the riders in the breakaway handle that. They get through there safely, it looks like. And this is a good little move here from Girard of the FDJ squad, getting a little bit of a march. Here's the attack again. Stuart O'Grady at the front, watching over his shoulder, and there goes Girard, trying to get a bit of an advantage from the breakaway.
Well, you know, when you're in a large group like this, trying to ride off the front with so far to go, 15 kilometers, I'm not sure that's a very sensible move for this guy to make, Bob, because look at Andreas Clear sitting at the back there. He's played a very canny game here this afternoon. Also in that group is Zach Dempster, the Australian rider on HTC as well, sitting there waiting to see whether or not Mark Cavendish can come back from the rear.
Well, if you're Girard and you don't have a fast sprint, especially against fast guys like Laszlo Bodrogi and of course Stuart O'Grady, you have to get an advantage. You have to have a chance to win, you have to attack those riders. If you can reduce the numbers and some of the stronger men come across with you and you can work together, then you have a much better chance than waiting in the breakaway. Still a pretty big group there and some very fast sprinters in the break. If you're Girard, you have to make an attack, otherwise you have no chance to win.
Well, if it was me, I would have waited to the Côte de Beausoleil, because if you've got the legs this afternoon, you wait 4 more kilometers, just be a little bit more patient. Then when you get to the Côte de Beausoleil, bang, and you hit them with a real good hard one, and then you open up 30 seconds quite quickly.
Well, I think we're most certainly going to see the aggression from the breakaway and the field come on the last 2 climbs. If you're not a good climber, it's also a good advantage to have a little bit of a gap off the front, and you can catch the back of the wheels as the riders come across attacking, and if you can stay in there over the top, then you still have a chance to win.
Oh, look at this. This is Chavanel now, Bleu Blanc Rouge, a champion of France. He didn't have a very successful Tour de France this year, certainly not compared to last year when he won 2 stages, the 2nd stage and the 7th stage, and won the led the Tour de France on 2 occasions. But this year he did something that he's never done in his career before. He's been the French national time trial champion, but never until this season was he the champion on the road.
Well, Sylvain Chavanel, a very classy racer, good in the classics, great in the Tour de France, especially in 2010. 2 days in the yellow jersey and 2 stage wins. That was the announcement that the French cyclists were back and serious about the Tour de France. They've had some very slim pickings over the recent years, but what a pedigree of the French riders. It's not very often that they win the Sprinters Classic. Most of them are concentrated on the overall standings in the big tours, but Sylvain Chavanel is an exception. He's a great classics rider as well.
What about Thomas Voeckler, though? Talking about the French in the Tour de France this year. Voeckler, French and national champion last year, then he comes back this year, loses the national title, but then all of a sudden he gets the yellow jersey again, as he did a number of years ago, and held on to it for 10 days ahead of Lance Armstrong.
Zachary Dempster, the rider from HTC High Road, looking dangerous in the breakaway. If he can get over these last couple of climbs, maybe all is not lost for HTC if the peloton doesn't come back together and Mark Cavendish would theoretically be able to win the sprint. We'll see if Dempster can do something from the breakaway.
Well, this is the second chaser out on the road here, and this is rather interesting to see because just a little bit further back we've got Marco Mercato from Vacansoleil, and remember he had a very good start to the season. This though, trying to get across is Laszlo Bodrogi, Team Type 1. They have got an incredible message to try and get out to everybody in the world that you can race at this level of the sport even if you do have Type 1 diabetes.
Laszlo Bodrogi on the American squad, wildcard invite for this big classic Paris Tours. It's great to see him in the breakaway and great to see him competitive all the way to the end of the bike race.
Well, we're now looking at the second group on the road because the rider off the front for FDJ is Arnaud Gérard. He's got himself an advantage, Bob, of 15 slim seconds, and that correlates to about 250 yards. And as he goes around that corner, it's the Côte de Beausoleil.
We'll see what strength he has left in his legs for this climb. I think that would be Rubens Bertogliatti, another Team Type 1 rider, very aggressive here in the Paris Tours finale, closing in on 6 miles to go in the bike race. The advantage for Gérard is 15 seconds over this man, but it's over a minute to the peloton. I don't think the breakaway is going to get caught in this year's edition of Paris Tours.
Team Type 1 Sanofi. This man, Bertogliatti, a couple of years ago was the winner of the opening stage of the Tour de France, and that was in Luxembourg. He leapt out of the pack. Nobody knew who he was, and all of a sudden, bang, there he was. Yellow jersey on the first day. You can just see the yellow car there. That's the neutral service vehicle, and that's riding right behind this man, Arnaud Gérard of France and of Française des Jeux. 6 miles of racing left to go, Bob. I think you're going to be right. I think we will see this breakaway today survive.
Well, fantastic tactics being used by Team Type 1. First, they sent Bodrogi in the breakaway, and then when he was caught, this man, Rubens Bertogliatti, countered. Here's that steep slopes of the second to last climb of the bike race.
Sight for sore eyes. 10 kilometers to go to the finish. 6 miles. This is a very good move. This will be Marco Mercato from Vacansoleil. A very good acceleration for the Italian on the Belgian-Dutch squad.
Mercato trying to get across to the lone leader, Gérard. He has closed that gap down inside of 10 kilometers now, just 6 miles left. Here is the peloton. We'll see what the time gap is. Hopefully, this is the peloton. One rider from Rabobank on the front. I do not think they're going to catch the breakaway today.
Well, race situation still Gérard on the front for FDJ, but this is the main field now. Watch out now, Bob. I think we're going to see some fireworks. Saxo Bank. In the second place there, it's Sky. They are trying to set this race up here this afternoon if they can. They're wondering whether or not they're going to get the signing of Mark Cavendish. What a complicated situation that's going to be over the next couple of weeks. Where will Mark Cavendish go? For the moment, at 6 miles to go to the finish, he's more concerned about where is the breakaway and can he catch them and show off his World Champions jersey, the jersey that everybody in the sport of professional cycling wants to wear, the one with the rainbow bands around the middle.
Good point. It's as complicated to win Paris Tours this year as the team situation will be next year. These two riders trying to get across to the lone leader, Vacansoleil and BMC, doing a big acceleration now off of the front of the breakaway. Here's our lone leader, a very courageous ride by Arnaud Gérard from the FDJ squad. What a coup it would be, what an upset if he was able to stay away to the end.
Well, the last rider for FDJ to win this bike race, in fact, was Philippe Gilbert himself in his last year for FDJ before he moved across to Omega Pharma Lotto and turned the clock back, Bob, to 2006. It was FDJ again, because on that occasion, Frédéric Guédon, at the autumn of his career, came out of the pack after a very good move down towards the end and got himself the win here as well.
Well, 2 against 1, these 2 riders chasing down the lone leader. That's the advantage to the little chase group here. Looking over his shoulder is Girard to see where the BMC man and Marco Mercado from Vacances Soleil are. They are closing the gap down. 3 men is better than 1 man in the finale of a big classic, but still a lot of dangerous riders left in the breakaway. That was a big group, and I don't think they're too far behind the 3 men in the front of the bike race.
Over the top now of the Côte de Beausoleil. Thank you very much for Girard here. He knows now he's being chased at around about 12 seconds. Marco Mercado had a very good race in the early part of this year because he rode the race in Colorado, and then of course he finished 3rd overall in the Tour of Poland. They've pulled out the yellow car, Bob, and now what does that tell you?
That these riders are just about to catch. BMC Vacances Soleil chasing FDJ. Just caught a glimpse of the other chasers from that breakaway. 1 more steep climb to go before the finishing town of Tours and the very famous Rue de Gromont for the finish of the bike race, the big avenue. Van Avermaet, the man from BMC, also joining Mercado. That is a very dangerous move.
It certainly is. We talked about BMC Racing at the start of the day with Alessandro Balin, Taylor Phinney, but of course the man they were thinking about was Greg Van Avermaet. He has got a very good turn of speed on the run down towards the finish line, and they're halfway across the gap. They've got, I would say, Bob, about 2 kilometers before they come to this final climb of the day, and that's, I think, where we might see the undoing of the leader. The Côte de l'Épont is on the horizon.
Just over the shoulder of Greg Van Avermaet is the lone leader, Girard. Van Avermaet had a great Bastogne-Liège earlier in the year. He almost pulled off the upset. He was caught just a couple of kilometers from the end by none other than Philippe Gilbert, but now he's having a great ride out in Paris Tours, and he has a great chance to win this classic.
Ooh, 7 kilometers to go to the finish, 4.5 miles of racing, the Côte de l'Épont, and look at this, Bob. Boom, boom, and out go the lights.
Let's see if Girard can react. He's having a tough time. He's got to dig deep to try to get back on the wheel on Van Avermaet. It's not going to happen. Marco Mercado and Greg Van Avermaet. We'll see where the chasers are. If you still have any energy left on the legs, you have to go right now.
Well, this is the moment now. Oh, it's so hurt. I told you, Bob, when if you go away with 15 kilometers to go, you've got to be confident. You've got to have that strength in your legs, because these climbs, although they're not massive climbs, these are not the cols of the Alps or the Pyrenees, but they hurt.
Here's the other riders from the breakaway trying to get across to our 2 lone leaders now, Mercado and Van Avermaet. I think a teammate of Girard's trying to get back off the front of that breakaway. There was still a big high-powered break chasing Girard, and you can see him just in the background. They've come together, 2 FGA rider now, and they're trying to close the gap now to 2 riders on different teams, Mercado and Van Avermaet, but both of them very strong athletes.
Well, 2 riders now from FDJ are trying to bridge themselves across the gap to the 2 leaders. Marco Mercado is not a prolific winner in the sport of professional cycling, but he has been extremely good over the last couple of seasons. The man I would be concerned about, though, is the BMC Racing, the American squad with a Swiss sponsor, Greg Van Avermaet. He's looking very good.
Well, Vacances Soleil's had a great run of success in the classics. They're a very aggressive team. BMC has had a great season. Of course, Cadel Evans has won almost every race that he's entered, including the Tour de France. They would love to add a classic here with that man, Greg Van Avermaet, on the BMC squad in the break with Marco Mercado.
Now, we're inside of 5.3 kilometers to go in Paris Tours this year. What an exciting finish we're about to witness here this afternoon. Greg Van Avermaet in the red and black jersey of BMC Racing at the front. He is with Marco Mercado of Vacances Soleil, separated by 100 meters, Bob. 2 chasers, Michael Delage and the other rider from FDJ there is Arnaud Girard. This is going to go down to the last 3 kilometers, that long straightaway down to the finish.
Don't count out the other riders from the breakaway. They're chasing what would be 4 leaders if they came together. 2 FDJ men chasing these 2 riders, Mercado and Van Avermaet. They're in the front. The other riders just coming in that last corner there just before they can see the breakaway now. So a lot of riders still in contention. Patience is going to be the order of the day. If you're sitting on that 3rd group on the road and you haven't done any work, you can produce an incredible amount of watts and leapfrog that gap inside of 5 kilometers, 3 miles to go in the bike race.
Well, I think the main field, Bob, they're out of it this afternoon. They're still looking for a minute and 20 seconds to get themselves into this bike race. People always ask me, why do you go into the early morning breakaway? Why do you go into the breakaway? Because at the Tour de France, we see it getting caught every time we come down to a sprint finish. But the reason you go to the breakaway, Bob, is because sometimes the sprinters get it wrong, and today they have.
Sprinters have definitely got it wrong. Here's the scene. Tête de la course, 2 riders in the front, 2 men chasing them, about to catch from FDJ. Here's the remnants of the breakaway led by Stuart O'Grady. They can all see each other on this long straightaway with 4 kilometers to go, just over 2 miles.
Well, Van Avermaet, looking at 4 kilometers ago, 2.5 miles of racing. He finished second overall in the Tour of Belgium in the early part of this year. He won a stage in Austria during the Tour de France, and of course he won the Tour of Wallonia, the French-speaking part of Belgium. This race separated by 12 seconds. 2 riders chased at 6 seconds by 2 other riders. Then, of course, the main field, the main group, the survivors of that early morning breakaway. Bob, you better start biting your fingernails, because these guys are wondering whether or not they're going to survive.
Certainly a nail biter, a barn burner here in the finale. Just about 3 kilometers to go. Geoffrey Lecoitre, the man from Team Radio Shack, not surprised to see him in contention still. He nearly pulled off a huge upset in this race last year.
Well, Michael Delage, 72, coming to the front. He gets a little bit of help every now and again from his teammate Girard, but Girard is the man who set up this race. That was the race referee going forward there. He wants to make sure that this is going to be a clean run down towards the finish line. Every time they swing around these corners, they're waiting to see where is going to be the Avenue de Grammont. Marcato there in the blue shorts, so he rides for the small Belgian-Dutch team Vacances Soleil. Van Avermaet must be thinking, Bob, I've got this one in the bag.
Van Avermaet licking his chops now. He's got just 3 kilometers to go in the bike race. The 2 FDJ men, tactically, they will be working together without any qualms. We'll have to see how that works out for the 2 men in the front on different teams, but you have to also have the strength, and perhaps Girard going a little bit too early, like you said, a little bit too far from the finish line, and the last couple of climbs unhinged him, and now they're going to be caught by these chasers.
Well, that was Bodrogi coming to the front of that group. Now another little move coming here from Team Sky, and right now we're looking to see Ian Stannard. Stannard is come back from the back end of this race. He's a very good rider on the track. He rode extremely well in the early part of the season in races like the Het Nieuwsblad race and of course the Gent-Wevelgem race, but now he's trying to get himself into the group on the run in towards the finish. The 2 riders from FDJ, they have been caught. I think what will happen is that now they've caught the 2 riders who are 3rd and 4th on the road, there'll be a slight slowing down when everyone's starting to think, who's going to do the pacemaking now? And that is reflected in the advantage, Bob. 20 seconds advantage for the 2 leaders.
Also, Stuart O'Grady with a very small group of riders. There was a huge group on the breakaway, 25 men. Now it's about 7 or 8 chasers behind the 2 leaders. So the breakaway losing a little bit of its momentum because it's a much smaller group now chasing 2 men. I don't think they're going to catch them. Just 2 kilometers to go. The only chance for these riders, if the 2 men in front, Mercado and Van Avermaet, start to mark each other, start to play that cat and mouse game and slow down, giving these men a chance to catch. But I don't think that's going to happen. Greg Van Avermaet, a very seasoned campaigner, a lot of experience, and he'll know just exactly how much tempo he needs to put into the breakaway, how much work he needs to do to keep them away till the finish.
Well, Van Avermaet has finished in the top 20 in this race over the last 2 participations, but this year, Bob, I think he's had a much more solid season in the one-day classics. 9th he finished in the Milan-San Remo at the start of the year, 7th in Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and 3rd in the San Sebastian Classic. He will now be starting to get into his mind, I'm a sprinter. I can take this guy any which way I want, and he's got to try and think how he's going to force Mercato to lead out the sprint.
Saxo Bank on the attack from the chasers, a small group trying to close down that gap. Van Avermaet, he will know that. He has a very good familiarity with this finish. He finished 2nd in the amateur version of Paris Tours back in 2006, so he's got a lot of experience. He'll know exactly what he needs to do. Sometimes when you finish 2nd in a race, you want to go ahead and win. Let's see if Van Avermaet plays it to perfection. They cannot look at each other. They cannot start playing that you're going to work, I'm going to lead it out, and start to hesitate, or they'll get caught from the riders that are chasing.
They certainly will. Inside now, Bob, 1,000 meters to go. That was the Flamme Rouge, the red kite. They're going to turn now onto the Avenue de Grammont. Look at the crowd that have turned out here for Paris Tours, and as they swing onto the Avenue de Grammont right now, I think they know they've got this. Chasing across the gap now, wearing number 132, is Kasper Klostergaard of Denmark. He's in 3rd position on the road, but this group is starting to stretch out. The win is going to go to Van Avermaet or Marco Mercato. I'm going to go for the Belgian.
2 leaders here. Van Avermaet sitting on the wheel of Mercado. He's going to look over his shoulder, see if he can hesitate a little bit longer. He wants to sit on that wheel as long as he can, but they cannot hesitate too much. Just about 400 meters to go now for our 2 leaders. They are going to contest the win in this great classic Paris Tours.
Well, this could be a great finishing off here for the rider in the red and black jersey, Greg Van Avermaet, locked into the wheel of Marco Mercato. Mercato is not a great winner of races. Look at the acceleration now coming from Mercato. He started the sprint. Greg Van Avermaet is over on the left-hand side in the red and black jersey. He's got into first position now for Van Avermaet. He accelerates. Oh, a little bit of cramp is going to Mercato there, but Van Avermaet is not going to stop until he crosses that line. BMC Racing, Bob, they've won the Tour de France, they've won Paris Tours. What a season for the American squad, as it looks as if Kloostergaard here from Saxo Bank is just going to survive for the 3rd place finish, and Ian Stannard of Great Britain and Sky Racing Team has got 4th.
Greg Van Avermaet wins the race. A crash there. That's one of the riders from the breakaway going down at the very last moment. Don't see that very often, but for Van Avermaet, a great win. He was so close in the Spring Classic to getting the huge win. He's been the champion of Belgium previously, but now he comes up with his own classic. A great ride by Van Avermaet.
Well, this is the next group on the road. They have survived off the front end of the peloton. In fact, this looks very much like Degenkolb coming up to the finish line. He's a very fast sprinter, but he's going to get challenged there by Matty Hayman, who's having a brilliant end to the season. Looks like Oscar Freire might have just got himself across the gap too, but big gap now, Bob, back to the main field. This is the group. We should see Mark Cavendish in this group, and he certainly has not had the race that he was waiting for this afternoon. But the winner, no doubt about that, Greg Van Avermaet of Belgium and BMC Racing Team of the United States.
Timed his acceleration from the breakaway to perfection, did a little bit of work to ensure the success of the breakaway, and Van Avermaet came up with the win.
Well, you can see Robbie McEwen is in that group there. Oscar Freire coming up through the middle there. Just for a little bit of pride in his last race for Team Radio Shack, Robbie McEwen leads them home. And there is Mark Cavendish at the back of the pack in the World Champions jersey. So, I tell you what, Bob, that was a real bit of a humdinger on the running towards the finish line. Look at this one more time, no doubt about it. Greg Van Avermaet had the sprint. Poor old Marco Mercato, not only could he not rival him, but he suffered from cramp in the last 50 meters.
Well, for Mercado, a pretty good result to get second in a big classic. No answer for this man, though. The superior sprinter, he had a great ride on Paris Tours, and the BMC, they can do no wrong. Team BMC having a great season. They've won the Tour de France earlier in the summer with Cadel Evans, and that has a domino effect on the riders. They got the momentum, they have the morale, and now they've come up with a big classic win here. Greg Van Avermaet saying thanks.
Alessandro Ballan there, getting the congratulations. Let's not forget Taylor Phinney was in this team as well. There is Marcus Burkhardt there, and they are probably looking at the big screen out on the finish line to see how their man got himself the victory. He was one of the possible pre-race favourites, but nobody expected it to be from a breakaway group like this, because we always talk about Paris Tours as being the race for the sprinters, which can get foxed by the breakaway.
Well, big crosswinds and a lot of steep climbs in the finale of the bike race in the last 30 kilometers. That was the undoing of the peloton. The peloton blown to smithereens, riders all over the course, but that man came across the line first. Greg Van Avermaet, great tactics and also the strength to win the sprint against Marco Mercado.
Well, there he got himself his 4th victory of the season to go alongside races like the Tour of Austria that he got a stage victory in July, and of course a stage victory in the Tour of Wallonia in July. But that, I have to say, Bob, just looking back over his pedigree, he's been a professional since 2007. That has to be the crowning moment of his career so far.
A real masterpiece put in by Greg Van Avermaet, not to panic when the rider from FDJ Girard went up the road. He didn't panic. He used Marco Mercado. Marco Mercado continued to do the work. Marco Mercado cramping up a little bit in the finale, but I don't think he would have been able to beat Van Avermaet in any stretch of the imagination on today's bike race.
Ça fait très dur. Le final, on fait le HLO avec toute l'équipe.
In the final of the race, we knew we were going to have all of the team at the front. And I saw an attack going, and there was about 22 riders got clear on the run in towards the finish, and I was the only rider from my team who managed to get into the gap. I'm probably the fastest of the team, and I knew that with that group of 22 I had a very good chance. So I wanted to wait until the final minutes, even though I was one of the fast guys. And when Mercato went on that last climb of the day, I thought this is a good move, so I went with him. So this is your first ever big victory. Does that relax you?
c'est quelque chose de spécial.
It's very special. It really is special. I finished third in San Sebastian in August, and after that I started to think Paris Tours is a kind of race that I could really do well in. It's a beautiful part of my career, and I'm hoping that maybe in the future it's not my last victory. And it's strange because Philippe Gilbert is coming to your team next year, and he's a former winner of this race as well. I think we've got a fantastic team for next year. It's great to see Philippe Gilbert coming across. We've got Alessandro Balin as well. He's a good classics rider. Today, I think that the team has got a lot of confidence in me. They showed that today, and I think I've got another chance sometime to win some more big races in the future.
Félicitations.
So there's confirmation that Greg Van Avermaet getting himself the victory there ahead of Marco Mercato, Kloostergaard in third, Ian Stannard of Great Britain in fourth place. Looking a little bit further down at Michael Delage in sixth, Geoffroy Lecatre in seventh place for Team Radio Shack, O'Grady in eighth place, and Arnaud Girard rounding out the top 10. Well, there he is, Greg Van Avermaet climbing up onto the dais here this afternoon. This is going to be, Bob, the biggest victory of his career to date at 26 years of age. Fourth win of the season. I think he'll put all of the other ones behind him for this one, Paris Tours.
All over but the teardrops for the fancied sprinters in this year's Paris Tour. It was a breakaway success for Greg Van Avermaet, a fast sprinter in his own right, easily outdistancing Marco Mercato. The only thing left is the bouquet of flowers and the winner's top step of the podium for Greg Van Avermaet of Team BMC.
And I wonder what sort of questions all of the other pre-race favourites were asking themselves. How did we let Greg Van Avermaet get into a breakaway of 22 riders on the run in towards the finish line?
Great ride. BMC continues an incredible season. They've been very successful throughout the year, principally with Cadel Evans, winner of the Tour de France, Tour of Romandy, a number of other races for Cadel Evans, Tirreno Adriatico, but his teammate now getting the glory of the top step of the podium, Greg Van Avermaet, maybe complicating next season even further when Philippe Gilbert and Thor Hushovd will join Team BMC.
On applaudit plus fort encore Greg Van Avermaet, le vainqueur de Paris Tour 2011. À la deuxième place, nous quittons la Belgique pour rejoindre l'Italie et nous accueillons le coureur italien Marco Mercato, deuxième de l'épreuve.
Well, the next man to come up in second position, Marco Mercato. Vacances Soleil, Bob, we always regard it as kind of a wild card team, but this season they've had a brilliant season.
They've had a great season, very aggressive team. They don't have a big field sprinter apart from Romain Fayou, who's capable of a top 5. So what they've done is go in the breakaways. Marco Mercato, a real specialist in the breakaways. He's almost won a number of stages and falls a little bit short again in today's Paris Tours.
No, he's been a very aggressive bike rider throughout this season, and the rider to come up to take third position is the Saxo Bank SunGard rider, and that should be Kasper Kloostergaard, and here he is.
Kloostergaard, the Danish rider, leaping out of the remnants of the breakaway, couldn't quite catch the two leaders. Greg Van Avermaet did a real sterling job to keep the breakaway with Marco Mercato in play throughout the last few kilometers. They both worked very well together and didn't give any of the riders from the remnants of the break the chance to catch up, but Kloostergaard came the closest and comes in third. A good podium for a young rider from Denmark on the Danish Saxo Bank squad.
So there are your top 3 finishers of this year's Paris Tours. Van Avermaet ahead of Marco Mercato and Kloostergaard.
Président du directoire de la Nouvelle République, et Monsieur Terry Bach, le maire de Minneapolis, qui ont adressé leurs félicitations au podium. Je crois qu'on peut lever les mains et les applaudir plus fort encore. Bravo à nos 3 champions, c'était évidemment. Donc, voilà, on va accueillir maintenant les vainqueurs de Paris Tour.